From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Saturday, May 10th, which means you're listening to a special weekend edition of the podcast featuring the Capitol Recap. Coming up, a wide-ranging bill to deal with Vermont's lack of housing is in its final stages, and we'll get an update on the details from reporters Carly Berlin and Peter Hirschfeld. That's after this. Vermont faces a number of economic headwinds, but its housing crunch may be the stiffest. Elected officials in Montpelier are putting the final touches on legislation that attempts to alleviate the problem. And in this week's edition of the Capitol Recap, housing reporter Carly Berlin gives Vermont Public's Peter Hirschfeld an update on this year's wide-ranging housing package.
Carly, during the last couple of legislative bienniums, we saw spending bills coming out of Montpelier that threw hundreds of millions of dollars at the housing problem in Vermont. That was all thanks to federal pandemic stimulus money, which is gone now. So how are lawmakers trying to meet the need for more housing in the absence of the substantial revenues that are needed to fund it?
One of the main focuses this year has been on finding a way to finance the infrastructure that's needed to actually build new housing. So lawmakers have been advancing a program called the Community and Housing Infrastructure Program, or CHIP. Idea here is to let municipalities borrow money for public infrastructure like roads, sidewalks, wastewater for new development, with the expectation that then the increased tax revenue from the development pays off the debt for the infrastructure. This is not a new concept in Vermont, but the change here is to use this tax increment financing concept at the scale of a single project, like one apartment building, rather than a large district throughout a downtown, to make it accessible to smaller towns who want to see more housing built. This has been pushed by the Scott administration, lots of housing advocates and developers who say it'll help make projects pencil out that simply aren't possible right now.
This tax revenue that towns would be able to collect to pay off those infrastructure bonds is revenue that, but for this program, would otherwise flow to the state's general fund. And there are a lot of Democrats that are skeptical of this approach. They feel like it's an unnecessary tax giveaway to projects that would happen on their own without this intervention. Is that skepticism creating any friction for this particular part of the housing bill?
It definitely is. This bill is sitting in the House Tax Writing Committee right now, which has probably been more sympathetic than any other committee in the State House to this line of thinking. They have been adding a lot of guardrails here, like location requirements, affordability requirements, et cetera, and a test to see, would this project have happened without this program? Boosters are now worried that the program is going to get so complex and narrow that it won't end up really serving the purpose that's needed.
This concept of using tax incentives to encourage municipalities to get into the housing game is something that Phil Scott has been pushing really hard for. The governor has also been strident about the need for regulatory reform, and he's especially concerned about what he sees as pervasive NIMBYism in Vermont and the ability of people to use the legal system to block development that they don't want in their own backyards. What, if anything, does this bill do to address those concerns?
Yeah, so there have been a lot of differences of opinion on how exactly to take a whack at this particular problem this year. So the House moved earlier this session to basically change who can lob one of these appeals against a new housing project at the local level. Right now, what state law says is you've got to live next door, or you have to get 19 friends to sign a petition with you in order to launch an appeal. The House got rid of those two provisions in place of a different legal standard that says you have to prove you are personally harmed by the development, like runoff from a new building comes onto your property and goes into the water you drink, something like that. But the Scott administration and some key senators are now concerned that this may actually open up a new avenue for appeals. They don't want to take out the proximity requirement saying, hey, you've got to be an immediate neighbor. So it is right now pretty unclear exactly where this appeals language might end up.
And finally, Carly, we talked earlier about the fact that government funding for new housing is limited. Elected officials, though, do have some general fund revenue to play with. How much of it are they putting toward housing, and what kinds of projects do they want to funnel it to?
Right. So the Scott administration had wanted to direct about $30 million to two programs aimed at middle-income housing, both, modest homes for rent and for purchase. The legislature only ended up giving Scott about half of what he sought for those. And they ended up also giving some additional money to building deeply subsidized affordable housing. Of course, the affordable housing advocates want more than that. They say their pipeline is slowing way down as they use up all that pandemic-era cash. But Scott has now identified this difference of opinion on where to put this finite housing funding as one of his main gripes with the state budget, which should be headed to his desk any day now.
That was Report for America Corps member Carly Berlin. Carly covers housing and infrastructure for VT Digger and Vermont Public. And you can read her full story on the housing bill at vermontpublic.org. Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. Today's episode was edited by Liam Elder Connors, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. Talk to you Monday.
Planet Money helps you understand the economy. We find the people at the center of the story.
Garbage in New York, that was like a controlled substance.
We show you how money influences everything.
Tell me what you like by telling me how you spend your money.
And we dig until we get answers.
I had a bad feeling you were going to bring that up.
Planet Money finds out. All you have to do is listen. The Planet Money Podcast from NPR.